You're listening to the Fan to Fan podcast, and today we're talking about the weird world of foreign remakes of American movies. Yes, you heard that right. We're talking about Turkish Star Wars, Italian Conan, and the Nigerian version of Titanic. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan to Fan podcast. This is your host, Bernie Gonzalez, and I am here with, and you've got a long list here, Ed, so bear with me, filmmaker, film historian, director, producer, feature films and shorts, web video producer, animation producer, DVD producer, and ninja enthusiast, Ed Glazer.
Hello, you've made me sound a lot more prolific than I think I actually am, but I'll take it. Okay,
and then in 2008, there was an interview with Agony Booth, and you were referred to as, quote, modern day Roger Corman.
Oh, I wish I was. No, I don't. I'm not sure that I am that, but I aspire to be that.
Well, you do have your own IMDb page. That's saying something.
Yeah, it's a start. Yes.
You are the president of Neon Harbor, independent entertainment studio, and you produce films and web series since 2005, is that right?
That's right.
Directed a number of short films, feature-length films, including Night of Anubis, video game comedy series Press Start and Press Start 2. Is it 41 episodes of Press Start, the Flash animated prequel series?
Something like that, yeah, about 40.
Okay, and features the voice talents of Mortal Kombat's John Turk, who was Sub-Zero, and David Humphrey, the original voice of Shadow the Hedgehog. The spoof series Ninja the Mission Force, so 20 episodes of that, and that's been syndicated on Blip and YouTube.
That's correct.
And so I have to go back to the modern day Roger Corman. Is that a compliment?
I hope so. I'll take it as one for sure. Roger Corman is one of my idols. I'm a huge fan of his. I've read his autobiography, the unofficial biography, and a number of books about his work at AIP and other various and sundry ventures. And of course, obviously, I watch a ton of his films and the films that he produced. So yes, I'm a big fan, but I am nowhere near as prolific as that guy has been.
What is it about his work that kind of informs maybe what you'd like to do and what you've done for quite a while?
He really understands how to milk a budget and make the most out of it, but he's always had a really strong philosophy of films as an entertainment product, and it's escapism, and it is for a particular demographic. It's for an audience. Sometimes he'll have to cut corners to make things work, but the stuff that he's done has always been very entertaining. And as a filmmaker and producer, he's never lost money by doing it, or has rarely lost money by doing it.
The escapism thing. So how did this start for you? Was this before high school, in high school? Was it a love of movies, or, what is it that kind of brought you to where you are now? Probably
Mystery Science Theater 3000. It was a case where I was a fan of the show, and I would watch all of the B movies that would be featured on the show and laugh along with Mike and Joel and the bots and think, man, I could make a better movie than that. And eventually I decided, well, I'm going to try. And so I picked up a camera and made a movie and found out that, no, I couldn't make a movie that was better than that yet. But I didn't put down the camera, and I just kept doing stuff.
So I have to ask, as a fellow Misty myself, did you ever find yourself watching any of the movies beyond the riffs, just, going out to, seeking out one of the films beyond, the Joe and Mike riffing to see what it was like without it?
Are you kidding? I had tons of those films. I sought out an original VHS copy of Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, the movie featured on my favorite episode.
They monkeyed around with his mind.
Nothing to worry about.
Then they lost his body.
Either I'm nuts or you are.
Now he's trapped inside a supercomputer.
We're nothing more than a bite in a giant computer.
Where fantasies are virtual reality.
We will terminate him.
Raul Julia, part machine, all man.
I guess I made some waves.
Overdrawn at the Memory Bank.
And those are hard to come by. They were available briefly in the 1980s on VHS and Laserdisc, and then never again. So yeah, no, I absolutely did that. Space Mutiny, Werewolf, a lot of the old monster movie stuff.
So Mystery Science Theater 3000, take that love through college. And at that point in college, are you starting to actually produce? And are you starting to make some of your own?
Yeah, about college was when I started to dabble in short films. A handful of short films, sort of vaguely in the horror genre, and they weren't very good. but I made them anyway. Then after college was when I did my first feature-length film, Press Start, which is a sort of pastiche of video game tropes and cliches and general silliness.
So do you remember what brought you from being a fan of horror films and going to someone who creates it? Because I think that's a big gap. There's something to say for someone who decides to go from intaking all of this entertainment to deciding to actually produce it.
I never really thought of it as being a large jump. I think it's a very direct one in certain cases. I would say, ask a little kid, and I think they'd see it because they'll watch TV shows, they'll have favorite TV shows, and then they'll go out in the garden and play as if they're playing their favorite TV shows. And, I think that there's a similar kind of thing where you become interested in a genre or a particular type of storytelling, and you get really excited about it, and you want to do that thing. I hesitate to say bigger now, but you look at current major shows like Stranger Things, which is clearly inspired by this love of 80s horror and atmosphere and a particular aesthetic. You could tell that the Duffer Brothers were like, we love this stuff so much, we want to do it. You might say, well, yeah, but it's not the 80s anymore. And they're like, it doesn't matter. We're still doing it. And I think that passion really translates pretty well. Once you're excited enough about something, you want to find an outlet for it.
What was your first production?
Well, the very first thing I did was actually a sort of Mystery Science Theater-esque riff on the Dungeons and Dragons movie from 2000, which we sort of did it Mystery Science Theater style, but the framing device was different. The idea was that the movie was the game that this group of kids sitting around a table were playing, and so they would comment through the movie, and then we kind of cut back to them and do sort of skits and stuff. But after that, I did a short horror film, very short, about 15 minutes or so, kind of a serial killer type movie.
And this is all while you're in college?
That one was while I was in college. The MST3K sort of thing was between high school and college.
So what about the logistics, cameras, microphones, editing software?
Oh, geez.
Were you familiar with some of that? Did you become familiar with it as you kind of, went through the process of creating the short and everything else?
I had some experience tinkering with editing software from some very small video projects that I did in high school. As for cameras, I think we borrowed one, and I was learning it as I went. I mean, it was just a little handy cam kind of deal. Might have borrowed a microphone as well that we just kind of jury-rigged to a broom handle or something to kind of use as a boom mic. So it was all silly stuff like that, right? And shop lights and basically anything that we could kind of get our hands on. I mean, there was no real clear plan, because you never have a clear plan when you first start out. You have no idea how this stuff is made, and so you're just doing it.
Are you watching behind-the-scenes featurettes on, well, at that point I would guess VHS, but maybe as DVDs are starting to become prolific, just anything that will show you how people are actually making things so that maybe you could reproduce that on some level?
Oh, yeah. My Bible was the commentary on Robert Rodriguez's El Mariachi.
Oh, sure.
Then I would get a shot of the bad guys getting squibbed, so I could put a machine gun sound over it and make it seem like there was continuous fire going on. It's just a weightlifting belt, a condom full of homemade blood made of food coloring and corn syrup.
And I think around that time I read his book, Rebel Without a Crew, and I just read Bruce Campbell's first book, which even had a recipe for blood in there, and we did kind of a variation on that.
If Chins Could Kill, was that it?
Yes, that's the one. So you're reminding me about all of this because I hadn't really thought about that in a while. But yes, I did kind of have bits and pieces of ideas and general inspiration from sources like that.
Were you in theater at all in grade school or in high school at all?
I did theater in high school, and then I attended the theater program in directing at the University of Illinois.
Okay, so it's directing stage productions?
Right. The philosophy being that it's an excellent foundation for doing films. You sort of take away the camera for a while and focus on the staging and the actors and the text. And you can film a play and have a very good movie. It's been done many times, but it's hard to go the other way around.
And while you were doing that, were you focusing on being a director, or did you find that you wanted to be an actor as well?
No, directing was pretty much always my main interest.
Okay.
I had done a little bit of acting in high school, but that really wasn't where my passion was. It was fun, but that wasn't necessarily where I wanted to go.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let's talk about a big passion that you have now. So the AV Club said you are a quote-unquote connoisseur of weird foreign remakes of American movies. And I think at some point you called it a remake exploitation.
Yes, which I can't take the credit for coining that phrase. A friend of mine coined that, and I just kind of took it and ran with it.
It's a good phrase. It's a nice way to kind of sum up this. So this is interesting for me because as I'm putting together my notes for our conversation, there were many times, and you'll have to tell me if this is disparaging or not, where I thought of these movies, it's like, oh yeah, they're foreign movie ripoffs. And I thought to myself, is that doing a disservice to these movies? And not so much in the fact that they're referencing, these big budget American movies, but so much that, they're taking the ideas, but in the end, they're still a production. There's that interpretation of a movie, their remake of Commando or Rambo or what have you. So I don't know if ripoff is a bad thing.
No, I mean, I think it depends. And I would say in many cases, no. I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that in many cases, that's exactly what they were doing. These were real filmmakers and producers in countries like Turkey and India who went home at the end of the day with a stack of VHS tapes and we're watching all of these movies and writing down notes of we'll do this scene and we'll add this scene and we'll incorporate this zombie scene even though it's an action movie and doesn't have zombies anywhere else, and we'll do this bit from Nightmare on Elm Street because it's cool. And absolutely that sort of thing was happening, and I'm not sure what else you would call it besides kind of ripping it off. But there are other cases where there are legitimate remakes that you'd say, well, okay, that's High School Musical China, or now in Bollywood, they're doing a number of official remakes and stuff. And that's like, okay, well, that's not a ripoff. That's just doing an interpretation. Or Russia's 12, which came out a handful of years ago, that was a remake of 12 Angry Men, which is really, really good. So, it kind of depends upon the circumstances.
Makes sense. All right. So I discovered your work through the Telly Award-winning web series Deja Vu that you produce. There's 30-some episodes. You just recently did an episode on the Magnificent Seven. I mean, you spotlight these unauthorized foreign remakes of popular big-budget films. So what brought you to create Deja Vu?
It was a very slow process that started with a Bollywood version of Silence of the Lambs, if you can imagine such a thing. And there's a scene in it, by the way, in which the Hannibal Lecter character sings and dances in a Zorro costume. But I was a big fan of the Hannibal series. I'd read the books and I had seen the films, and in doing research on Silence of the Lambs, I discovered that there was this Bollywood remake. And I was like, well, what's this? I have to watch this. So I got it. And at the time there were no subtitles available for it, but that didn't stop me. And it was just kind of insanity, but also really compelling and interesting. And I watched it with a number of my friends, and I kind of started thinking, I wonder what else is like that out there. And then shortly thereafter discovered the existence of this thing called the Turkish Star Wars, which is a Turkish action science fiction film from 1982 that lifts all of its special effects space footage from Star Wars. Just all of the Death Star and the X-Wings and all that stuff. They're just using it like stock footage and incorporating it into their film for all the spacey, sciencey fictiony stuff. It's not really quite the same thing as Star Wars because it's got its own storyline and all kinds of crazy kung fu fights with mummies and giant Muppets and robots, and it's absolutely worth watching. And that one sort of melted my brain. And I thought, okay, well, now I need to find even more of these things. And so slowly I started accumulating these foreign remakes of popular American films, some authorized, some totally unauthorized, most of them totally unauthorized. And I started, more than just kind of pointing and laughing and riffing, I became curious, where did these come from? What was the situation? What was the context in which they were made? Because actual people are making these films. Why are they doing something that's kind of a copy? How are they able to use this footage? What were the circumstances under which these were made? Because they're, in some cases, very, very, very cheap and raw and rough looking. Who are these people that made them? And so I started learning bits and pieces here and there. And I realized that at some point I needed to stop sort of filling my brain with this information and letting it kind of all filter out and eventually disappear, and maybe do something with it. And I thought about doing a blog, or I thought about maybe doing a book, but I didn't have the time at the time to do a book. The idea struck me to do little short form 5-minute videos for the web that highlighted some of these films. And so each video highlights a particular film and talks about the context in which it was made.
And I'm glad you did, because that was actually my introduction to Turkish Star Wars. And I guess in a sense, it had the same impression on me that it did for you. I thought, okay, well, I'm aware of Star Wars, but through your show, which is incredibly well produced.
Oh, thank you.
To see something like Turkish Star Wars and the use of Indiana Jones music, to Star Wars footage, it's brazen.
Yes.
To see something like that, especially in our culture, a culture that where copyright infringement, it's such in the foreground of anyone who's not only creating things. There are so many more beyond Turkish Star Wars that are just amazing. When you hear their stories, the stories are almost more amazing than the production.
Often that's true. Yeah. And that was, I think, my favorite thing about delving into this, is that there's this wealth of information beyond the surface. And so while a particular film might not be that exciting to watch, there is more to it than that. It's deeper than that.
I think the question of why do they exist is not, I think that's an easier question to answer. Remakes are not old to Hollywood, but you think of something like The Eye or Taxi, The Grudge, Old Boy, Shall We Dance, Let Me In, The Departed, all movies that have been remade, TV shows like Homeland or Ugly Betty or House of Cards, The Office, those have been remade. So I think the same philosophy in these foreign remakes, that they're taking something that's very popular, that's identifiable, and something as big as Star Wars, very much so, but even movies like you mentioned with Silence of the Lambs, it would be a thriller or something, not necessarily a Bollywood production with a musical number in it. It's been appropriated by a different culture, which I think on its own says something about how they interpret our movies, U.S. society, and how they view these big budget films that Hollywood is producing.
That's one of my favorite things about them, is that you're sort of seeing we're seeing our own culture through a different lens. And suddenly you're watching a film where the things that we think were the most important parts about one of our movies is completely absent from a foreign remake. There's an Indonesian version of The Terminator that is almost shot for shot like The Terminator, at least a lot of the time, except there is no robot. And the reason for that is that, well, they swap out the robot for an evil spirit. And it does a lot of the same kind of work for the film. But you think, well, but the whole point of The Terminator is the robot from the future, right? Well, not necessarily. It depends. It might be that the most exciting thing to such and such a producer is the action, or particular set pieces, or just the fact that it's a popular movie that did well at the box office somewhere else. So let's just take as much of it as we can reasonably do and make it and hope for the best. And there's any number of reasons why they might take a particular American film and remake it or rework it or steal pieces out of it.
Let's go through some of these examples, because I have a list, and I mean, most of them are all thanks to the show that you put together, Deja Vu, and just some of the great examples that you highlight. So some Italian foreign remakes: Jaws, Conan the Barbarian, James Bond, starring, of course, Sean Connery's younger brother. And then there was, with the Conan the Barbarian, Ator, a film series of 4 Italian films made in the 80s, and then going back to Mystery Science Theater, it was riffed on the Cave Dwellers episode.
That's right.
Between the time when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Arius, there was an age undreamed of. And unto this, a warrior destined to seek revenge against the mighty tyrant who slaughtered his people. But this isn't the Hyborian age. It's Italy, 1982. And I'm getting that familiar feeling of deja vu.
The Ator films are kind of amazing. The first one is very much sort of Conan the Barbarian. It's just with spiders instead of snakes. The sequel came out around the same time that Conan the Destroyer came out, and was clearly meant to cash in, but they didn't have the budget or simply didn't feel like doing that kind of story, and so it kind of meanders, and they reuse the same set ad infinitum.
And isn't there a scene in that one where he fights his own shadow?
That's the first one, yes. Yeah. We need a cheap action sequence. He'll have a sword battle with himself, with his shadow on the wall, and we'll add in all the clang sounds in post.
And his partner throughout the movie is a little bear cub.
Yes, Keogh, the bear cub. Oh my gosh, it's worth watching for that alone. Yeah, it's there's a lady who's sort of the equivalent to what's her name? I can't remember her name.
The female thief, the blonde female thief.
Yeah, exactly. There's sort of an analog for her, but there's no sidekick except there's just this little adorable bear cub named Keogh who follows him around and helps him out and is maybe the most adorable thing in the world.
And just happens to feature Miles O'Keefe, who's not Italian, at least from everything that I've read.
No, he is American. Unless I'm getting my chronology mixed up, he had just kind of come into the spotlight doing a Tarzan film. And so he was probably an approachable, relatively inexpensive, but marquee value muscle man who they could pull in to do the Arnold stuff. That was very common practice with a lot of the Italian sort of cash-ins, where they were really making them for the international market and not specifically the Italian market. And so in order to get them to sell overseas, whether that's back to American shelves or more likely elsewhere in Europe and other parts of the world, having an American actor who is at least kind of name was very valuable.
The producer, or was it the director, I think, for Ator, at least the first film, changes his name to it's something along the lines of David Mills or David Wills.
David Hills, I think. I remember that because the joke in MST3K is the hills have eyes, but they have glaucoma right now.
I mean, this is a producer that probably has a very Italian-sounding name.
Yeah, it's like Aristide Mastichesi or something like that.
In order to try to get a bit more of an international appeal to get this movie out there, they're thinking maybe if it sounds like it came out of Hollywood, like it was a studio production like Conan the Barbarian, someone's more likely to buy it, and distribute it. Oh,
yeah. I mean, credit changing was rampant, especially in Italy, but in other film industries as well. Whenever they had their sights set on an international market, it was always make it Anglo, make everybody sound like they're Anglo, because that's what people care about. They don't want to see foreign-y sounding names. They want to make it sound like they want it to sound like it came out of Hollywood.
I'll continue my conversation with Ed about unauthorized movie remakes from around the world in just a few seconds. In the meantime, remember you can find the Fan to Fan podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan to Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN, or on Twitter at Fan to Fan Podcast. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out, send the message, and let me know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
So here's some movies that came out of of Turkey and not Hollywood, but very much were taking advantage of some Hollywood productions. A Captain America film, which features Spider-Man as a villain, Batman, Star Wars, James Bond, Straw Dogs of all movies, Exorcist, Psycho, and also a Star Trek movie.
That's right.
In one episode, you talk about the Nigerian version of Titanic, which very much just literally riding on the wave, no pun intended there, of the Titanic and everything that James Cameron was able to do with that movie. So much so that in one of the clips in your show, you kind of very, very nicely cut from Celine Dion's Love Will Go On to the Nigerian interpretation of it. And I mean, it's just copying it wholesale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
A loveless betrothal, a forbidden romance, and a doomed ship carrying it all toward tragedy. It's a tale of American independence breaking free of old world social conformity. But the story is a little different when told in Nigeria.
You know, there's sort of myriad reasons why these films get appropriated and localized. In the case of there's a Turkish version of The Exorcist, and that was an instance where the original film had been getting huge press worldwide, but it had not yet come to Turkey. And the Turkish producers had seen the film in Europe and knew that it was big and realized that they could make an Exorcist film of their own and get it onto theaters before the American one even got there. And so they did. Now, that was not the case for every one of these kinds of films, but that was one of them.
And isn't that similar to the story with the movie that David Hasselhoff starred in for Corman? It was an Italian production, and the movie had not been, Star Wars had not been released yet in Italy, but they were kind of charged with making something like Star Wars.
Right, yeah, and that was Corman, I believe, picked that one up for distribution, I think, later on, but it was done exclusively in Italy by a production company there. And it was Luigi Cozzi who was directing it. And so it was a producer who said to him, hey, we want to get a Star Wars has just come out. It came out a few months ago in America. We want to make a movie like Star Wars. Can you make a movie like Star Wars? We want you to write and direct it. And Luigi Cozzi says, yeah, sure, that's fine. I can do that. And the producer says, great, I'll be there in 3 weeks. Show me what you got. And that was all well and good, but Star Wars had not yet come out in Italy, so Luigi Cozzi had never seen it. And is tasked with writing and then making a movie that is just like it. But fortunately, he was a big sci-fi buff, and he happened to have a novelization of Star Wars, which had already come out. And so he read through that and then was able to kind of use that as inspiration to do his film.
And that was Star Crash.
Prepare yourself to enter a strange new world of amazing sights and sounds. Star Crash. From deep space, from the farthest reaches of the haunted universe, comes the supreme galactic spectacle, Star Crash, rated PG.
Star Crash, that's right.
With, of course, a very young David Hasselhoff.
Very young, and a rather younger Christopher Plummer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as the Emperor of the Universe. He filmed all of his scenes in a day, and he was coming onto the set that day, and Luigi Cozzi was running around saying, all right, everybody, all of the crew, everybody be quiet. Everyone has to be quiet. Christopher Plummer's coming on set, and we're recording direct sound, so we need silence all over the place. And the star of the film, and I'm blanking on her name.
Oh, Carolyn Monroe. She was in a few Hammer films.
Yeah. All right, so Carolyn Monroe is asking, what does he mean direct sound? And they say, oh, well, they're recording live sound with microphones and everything. And she says, well, what have we been doing? And it's only then that they tell her, yeah, we haven't been shooting sound. We've been shooting silent just to shoot cheaper and quicker, which was common practice in Italy at the time, because you just dubbed the whole thing in post, and then you wouldn't have to have a sound crew on set, which is unfortunately how Carolyn Monroe was dubbed by someone else in the end product.
So this is beyond ADR.
It's all ADR. But the thing is that Christopher Plummer was the biggest name, and they only had one day with him, so they wanted to make sure that they got a full Christopher Plummer performance that they weren't going to dub later on, at least for the non-Italian market.
Unlikely they were going to get Christopher Plummer to come back into the studio and record his lines.
Not so much.
No, not so much.
You know something, my boy? I wouldn't be emperor if I didn't have some powers at my command.
Imperial battleship, halt! The flow of time!
So there's a Korean animated Tron version, and you dedicate an episode to that one, and that was pretty terrific.
It's kind of a weird one, because there was a fair amount of Korean animation going on at the time, because there was an embargo of sorts, or sort of a ban on Japanese cultural products, because there had been such a long Japanese occupation of Korea. And once Korea became independent and the occupation ended, they said, okay, no more Japanese stuff at all. So no music, no films, no books, no nothing. But nevertheless, some of that pop culture sort of seeped in, and there was this awareness of manga and anime. And since they couldn't import the actual stuff, they created their own. And in many cases, it was pulling bits and pieces from existing anime. So they would have giant robot anime that would sort of copy stuff from Voltron and Mazinger and all of those others, and have bits and pieces of all of those. But this particular one copied Tron for some reason. I guess they just thought it was cool enough. And so rather than sort of mimicking a Japanese film, they're like, hey, let's do Tron. Let's do it anime style. Let's do it in the style that we've been doing all of these, but have light cycle kind of stuff and all of those cool disc games and everything.
I mean, that's one of the things that I love about your show is the fact that that you provide great context. And in a case like the animated, the Korean version of animated Tron, the embargo for anime, something that I would have never thought of. But when you have that context and you kind of give an idea for this production and what the filmmakers were working under, whether there was something like that, an embargo, or what their inspirations were, I think it helps to start flesh out all the work that this production has, regardless of the fact that it's a remake or a ripoff. But how long does it take you to research an episode?
That can vary greatly, and that's one of those reasons why Deja Vu is not really a regular series. It's very sporadic. Sometimes research can take a couple of weeks if there's a lot of information available about it. Sometimes it's months and months and months as I am pulling tiny morsels of information and am trying to kind of pull together a narrative that I can tell in 5 minutes, because there's so little known about these films, and kind of people have little bits of knowledge and a little idea, or can tell me a little bit about how a particular aspect was done, and so because it's not always easy to go and just talk to them. Although I have done that to a certain degree, but the thing is that I couldn't do a show like this every week because it would be missing whatever depth of research that I'm getting now. I wouldn't necessarily be getting then, because I wouldn't have the time to pull all of that information together. There was that Nigerian version of Titanic. Just getting the film was difficult. It took months and months until I finally managed to track down a professor of African studies in Europe who was able to hook me up with a copy of the film.
Wow. So, I mean, outside of obtaining the film, watching the film, dissecting the film, let alone trying to find information on the cast or the production crew, I mean, you're literally, doing detective work here and trying to find out as much as you can about the film for what amounts to this 5-minute summation. I mean, it's a lot of work that really goes into it, let alone the technical aspects of actually shooting the 5 minutes.
The thing that I try not to do is a lot of sort of reviewing of the film, because to me that's sort of up to the audience, right? My goal is to get people really excited and pumped about these films and learn things about them that they'd be able to take into a viewing of it. And it's one of the reasons why, unless it's really relevant, I try not to talk about the endings of films. And it's one of the reasons I try to keep these episodes relatively short. They're almost like trailers. And so, I don't necessarily want to kind of get into what is in the film. I want to talk about what's around the film. And then you can go watch the film and see what you think. And, some of the films I talk about may not be amazing films and may be kind of a slog, particularly for, a 2016 American audience. But that doesn't negate the fact that there are many things about the production of it and the context of it that are really interesting.
And I imagine a lot of these remake exploitation films have been either completely lost or partially lost, destroyed, or in poor condition. So by the time you get your hands on a version of it to watch, I mean, you're kind of maybe piecemealing a movie together.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had to stitch one together, although I've probably come close on occasion. There are a number of Turkish films, probably dozens or hundreds, that have been totally destroyed, or as far as we know, totally destroyed, because there was no real preservation of any kind for that period in film history. And so things will occasionally pop up and will be found. For example, Turkish Star Wars, which was just discovered, and I own, and I'm getting scanned and hoping to be able to do more with that in the future. But generally speaking, these things exist on just the VHS tapes that they were distributed on in Europe or what have you, or on very chintzy VCDs in Africa, or a duplicate of a duplicate of a duplicate of a VHS tape that has now been encoded into a DivX file or something.
Yeah, so a lot of this is confined to like maybe trading on forums, maybe occasionally popping up on eBay, and that's, if you know what you're looking for, but you're working with this dedicated and I would imagine knowledgeable fan base of these foreign remakes. So, I mean, it's really going back to Mystery Science Theater. It's almost the extent of trading tapes.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I learned fairly early on, is that there's it's a fairly small crowd that are really passionate about this. And so the people where I've read their books and, have read articles and stuff, I find that I'm like, oh, I'm meeting you right here, like on a forum or exchanging emails with you, because it's such a small, it's such a small group. I bought the rights to and released a Turkish version of Rambo around 2008 and did an English language dub, which we released on DVD. And I was doing a lot of research at that point into the background of Turkish films in the 80s and action films from Turkey in the 80s. And so managed to meet a really wonderful group of folks, including the author of Mondo Macabro, which is like one of the Bibles of weird world cinema. And that was really terrific and very, very, very helpful for somebody who was kind of just getting into this whole scene.
And the Turkish Rambo remake is Rampage, right?
That's right. Yes.
He's drawn first blood. He fights for his country. And his weapon is legendary. From the director of Turkish Star Wars comes Rampage. His mission to kick ass and eat kebabs, and then kick more ass. Rampage. He's no Turkish delight. When the going gets tough, he goes the distance. When the heat is on, he makes lemonade. And when life hands him lemons, he f***s their shit up. Rampage.
So you have the rights to release it as a DVD, a Blu-ray?
Well, DVD, but I no longer do. It was only for about a 5-year period.
Okay.
And so, unfortunately, the disc is out of print.
Did you ever have an opportunity to do a theatrical screening?
Yeah, we did a couple of screenings, and awesome. I know that there was a theater in Canada that's run by the guy who directed Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter, and I know that he did a screening of the film.
I'll conclude my conversation with Ed in just 1 second, but in the meantime, if you are listening on iTunes, please take a moment to rate and review. Just search for the Fan to Fan podcast, go under reviews, enter a star rating, or write a review if you have a second or two, and click send. That's how easy it is. I will greatly appreciate it. Thanks. So let's go back to this, the Turkish Star Wars restoration. So 1982, Man Who Saves the World, better known as Turkish Star Wars, comes out. And I would imagine, a lot of the prints are the 35 millimeter prints are destroyed, lost, misplaced, or what have you. So how did you get your hands on a very good, solid print of the movie?
Sure. Well, I wish I had a very dramatic story for you, but
I can always put dramatic music in the background.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. Right. No, there are only about 7 prints of the film made at all, and that's, I think, not uncommon for the time, and these things would be chucked around all over the place to the various regions. They get beat up and they get screened, and then they get screened, and then they bicycled over to another place. So they all get kind of worn out, but all but one of the remaining prints had been destroyed, and there was one projectionist who, after he was done with the film, lied to the distributor and said, the print was damaged during projection, so it's all chewed up and it doesn't work anymore. And the distributor said, okay, well, don't send it back, it's fine. And then he kept it. Eventually, 30 plus years later, after keeping his collection and showing it to friends and so forth, he sold the film to a very good friend and colleague of mine, Ali Murat Gürven. And Ali Murat was interested in maybe doing a restoration, a scan, a Blu-ray release, something with it, and just discovered that it was an insurmountable task at this point in Turkey right now, extremely expensive. One of the bizarre things is that there actually isn't a whole lot of interest in these films in Turkey. And so accomplishing something like that is actually really quite hard. It's elsewhere, it's in the West, it's in Europe and America, where people like us have a passion for these crazy cult movies. And so Ali Murat decided, I'm not going to be able to do this. And so I bought the print from him, and now I'm working to see how much I can do with this to at least get it preserved, scanned, which has happened, and then see where I can go from there. Because the last thing I wanted was for it to get chopped up into bits and sold as individual frames, or stuck in a warehouse somewhere or a barn gathering dust and mold.
And similar to Rampage, are you looking to eventually get to a DVD or Blu-ray release, let alone maybe a screening in a theater?
Certainly that's the holy grail, right? Like if we can get it seen to that level, that would be amazing. My hope is to at least make it available in some way theatrically, but there's a lot of questions that have to be answered before I can make any claims one way or the other. So
I had one big one. How are you going to get around the music?
Right, exactly.
Footage.
Yeah, I mean, then these are the questions. Most important to me, step one was just getting it preserved. And then everything else can be answered after that. If it waited another 20 years before anything happened with it, then you have a movie that is now 50 years old, that's been deteriorating and is the only print in existence that's never been scanned. And, good luck doing it then. So to freeze it where it is right now, at least, that was step one.
Since you mentioned that in Turkey itself, maybe there's not enough of a fan base, enough interest to preserve, let alone maybe promote Turkish Star Wars. In Deja Vu, there's a few times where you mentioned Onar Film. So I was starting to look information about them, and it looks like it's a small Greek company that released Turkish cult movies from the 60s and 70s to save them from obscurity. But could you talk a bit about Onar Films and maybe how you've worked with them? Because it seems, at least in my very limited research, there aren't many foreign remake distributors that are out there.
No, and Onar Films is a rather sad story because it was a one-man company. Bill Baronis, who's a Greek fellow and really terrific, wonderful guy. And he was the one who got me in touch with producers in Turkey when I wanted to buy the rights to the Turkish Rambo. And his passion was these crazy cult Turkish movies. And he did amazing work getting them cleaned up as best as possible, working with the best possible sources, which sometimes was a VHS tape, sometimes film elements, sometimes some of both. Doing fantastic special features for them, including documentaries and essays and so forth, and doing these very limited run DVD releases. And so he did a Turkish Superman double bill with 2 Turkish Superman movies that are amazing. The one is the more well-known one that was directed by Kunt Tolgar, and the other one was Iron Fist, The Giants Are Coming, which has a character who's sort of dressed like Superman, sort of dressed like Batman. He did the Killing movies, which are based on Italian photo novels. He did a Turkish version. He released the Turkish version of Death Wish, and just absolutely wonderful stuff. And unfortunately, Bill passed away a few years ago of cancer. Since then, there has really been no one who's been able to kind of pick up that torch. And part of that is because the audience for this kind of stuff is just so niche. And so he spent a lot of time just dealing with that and knowing that, the people that are interested in buying these kinds of films are really only interested in buying the kind of marquee value ones, the ones that in the West we have a real strong connection to. So Superman, so Captain America versus evil Spider-Man,
sure.
Stuff like that. It's very difficult to do a full release of something like this because you're never going to find a major distributor to get this stuff in stores. You're only going to be able to do a limited run. And the thing about limited runs is that those are really expensive to do a small run of 500 or 1,000 DVDs, which means that your DVD is going to cost maybe $25 or $30, which means that you're kind of squeezing that niche even tighter. And so only the real hardcore fans are going to shell out money for it. And you're not even probably going to sell out of your short run of DVDs. Plus, there's the issue of piracy, because as soon as these DVDs come out, they're immediately up on torrent sites with all of the special features that have been put in, and it becomes kind of a losing game.
Between production costs, let alone obtaining a film or a decent working, copy of the film, then you have the production cost, then you have the promotion of it, and even then, like you mentioned, maybe you're promoting 500, 1,000 copies of the film, and after all that's said and done, as long as people aren't torrenting or whatever, I mean, it's really a small, but I mean, seemingly very passionate fan base. And it's films that I was looking through the list of some of these, a lot of them are for movies that were created in the 70s and 80s. The Terminators, the Rambos, Trons, Commando, Nightmare on Elm Street, and then you have some like The Matrix and Evil Dead, Harry Potter. But a lot of these films kind of are hearkening back to these films of the 70s and 80s out of Hollywood So I just wonder if we're going to see fewer and further foreign remakes.
Yeah, it's you just can't get away with it anymore unless you're India, and even there has been more of a crackdown on unauthorized remakes and a little bit more partnering, and so it's still happening there, but you're getting official remakes of American films to a certain extent. The same thing is happening in China. High School Musical China. Disney is forming a big production company, arm in China. A number of TV shows are being exported all over the world for localized versions. There's an amazing and hilarious documentary called Exporting Raymond about a Russian production company that decides to do a version of Everyone Loves Raymond for Russian television. And so they bring out the writer, the showrunner for Everybody Loves Raymond, to kind of get his input as they start to make the pilot. And you're watching this poor guy see his work like being pulled this way and that, further away from kind of his original vision for it. And it's very interesting, very entertaining, and absolutely worth a watch. There is still some of that happening in Turkey as well. I know there was a Turkish version of Monk. I believe that there's a Turkish version of Golden Girls, which actually I think the Golden Girls has gotten remakes in several countries, but I could be wrong on that. So it does happen with television, but again, it tends to be official licensed localizations.
The remake thing is not something new to the international movie, let alone the TV world out there.
Right, absolutely. And of course, we're all kind of familiar with when it tends to happen in America with foreign movies, The Ring and, the various television shows, The Office and so forth.
Sure.
So, and that's sort of one of the reasons I've kind of stayed away from those, is because we're familiar with them. It's the stuff that we're not as familiar with that really interests me.
So to appropriate Jack Nicholson's line from the 1989 Batman movie, what do you do with all those wonderful toys that you use in Deja Vu, all the props? Because I've seen a Tron disc, Star Trek uniform shirt, gorilla mask, Neo's trench and glasses, Freddy Krueger's sweater and claws. Do you just have a very interesting closet?
Sometimes, yes. And, sometimes I'm able to pull bits and pieces from film projects that I've done. Sometimes I just rent something for a day. Sometimes I borrow somebody's black trench coat and get a $1 pair of cheesy sunglasses or something. And the thing about the show is that you're seeing, I kind of want to put my passion into it. And I wish I haven't done enough of this recently with the props and so forth. But, it's always, I will occasionally dress up in costume as a character or something that kind of befits the film. And usually in as cheesy a way as possible, like a Batman mask that's really clearly made for kids, or a Captain America shirt that's just like a t-shirt that has the battle damage on it, or, things like that. Or like a Freddy Krueger outfit that's not quite right. And it's sort of the way that I used to engage with films when I was a kid, because, my first movie was Superman. The first movie that I saw in theaters was Superman 4. And I went with my own cape that was probably an apron or something to the theater with my parents to see this film, because I got so excited I wanted to like dress up as the characters. And so it's like that's kind of what I want to bring to Deja Vu with the props and the costumes and stuff. It's just sort of some goofy silliness that's a little bit more of my like inner kid side.
Well, for my part, the passion comes off very well, and I'm grateful you do the show. So how do we get people to check out Deja Vu? Because I enjoy the show, but we have to get more people to watch this.
Well, you can find it on my website. It's neonharbor.com. And you can also just go to Deja Vu, that's VIEW, because it's a terrible pun, which is part of also one of those things that you can expect to see on the show is lots of terrible puns. But it's dejavu.neonharbor.com. But if you just go to neonharbor.com, under movies and shows, there's Deja Vu. You can find it and watch all the episodes.
I actually look forward to the pun at the end of every episode, so I appreciate all the work that you put into those.
Oh, I'm really glad. There have been several scripts where the thing that takes the longest is not the research, but it's the figuring out a decent pun that can lead out of the episode or lead into the episode.
And you've got a few movies available for purchase on Amazon and on the store section of Neon Harbor, including Ninja the Mission Force and Press Start. Is there anything upcoming that you'd like to promote? I know recently you just did an episode focusing on the Magnificent Seven, and was it based a Turkish remake of the Magnificent Seven?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Anything else on the horizon coming up along with the Turkish Star Wars restoration?
Sure. Well, a few more Deja Vu episodes are forthcoming. I'm working on an episode on the Mexican Batwoman that is heavily inspired by the Adam West Batman series. A look at 3 Turkish versions of the Phantom, as in like the purple guy in the jungle, Billy Zane and all that kind of stuff, and not Phantom of the Opera. And what is the other one? The other one, I'm working on one more. It's, oh yes. And this one, I hope to coincide with the Fox TV remake, but an Egyptian version of the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
All right, there we go. And one thing I completely forgot about it. So I noticed in some of the credits that your wife, is it Megan Rachel?
Rachel, yes.
Rachel, that she's written and acted in a number of your projects. I was going to ask, what's it like working with your wife?
Well, it's great. I always know where her office is. No, she's terrific. My series Ninja the Mission Force exists exclusively because of her. I had kind of had an idea to do a series that kind of spoofs the cut and paste ninja movies that came out of Hong Kong in the 80s. Speaking of repurposing films, they would take these Asian films from, literally all over Asia, to which they already owned the rights, stick white guys in ninja suits into these movies that already exist, just shooting new scenes and plugging them in, and then releasing them internationally as if they're new films and touting their Caucasian stars as if they're Hollywood stars. And so they made all these terrible ninja movies for the VHS market in the 80s, and they're just something else. So we kind of did a series that could have took that idea and ran with it, putting ninjas into all of these other movies like Night of the Living Dead and an Orson Welles movie, and all of the weirdest kind of possible movies that we could think of, and insert them and then sort of redub the whole thing like What's Up Tiger Lily. I kind of had that idea to do it for a while, but I'm not really a writer. Megan was really excited about the project, and she was like, hey, well, if you're looking for a writer, I would love to do it. And I said, absolutely. And she got what I was going for very immediately, and came up with a really funny concept for the show. And so, yeah, it was terrific. I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for her.
So not only is she a fan, but I would imagine your Friday nights, maybe after watching Captain America Civil War, might include watching a Japanese version of Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So your your movie collection must be pretty exotic, to say the least.
It's bizarre, yeah. Not exclusively, but yes, there's a lot of weird stuff in there.
All right, I wish I'd written some really terrific pun to end the episode with, but I did not. I'm just incredibly grateful that you put together Deja Vu and that you have more in the pipeline here, because I'm very excited to see more.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
That's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more fan-to-fan conversations on the Fan to Fan podcast. Thanks for listening.
Normal view.